Followership is really just the other side of the coin of leadership, in the sense that, what is the most significant measure of effective leadership? Look at the followership base. Is the followership engaged? Are the things that the executive leader says resonating with the employee base? So there are different ways of thinking about followership, almost from a methodology or from a philosophical perspective. Servant leadership, which we've talked about the first time that you and I met, is a methodology or a way of describing what followership looks like and the relationship between the follower and the leader. But at the end of the day, what I say about what is good followership is simply the ability for a leader to create those who actually want to follow.
Welcome to the Warriors at Work show. This is Jeanie Coomber, your guide and host. This is a show for men and women in the workplace who want to move from the predictable to the potent. This is your weekly dose of inspiration with an edge. I talk with CEOs and shamans, sports marketing executives and therapists. All of us are like-minded thinkers and doers who tell stories, share wisdom, and challenge each other to have the best life possible inside and outside the office. Welcome to your Warrior Conversation. Welcome to the Warriors at Work show. This is Jeanie Coomber, your guide and host. I am so excited, my Warrior Nation, to bring to you a series on followership through the lens of senior executive leaders in various industries in different intervals in their career, all of which is in an effort to really help all of us as leaders look at how we're creating cultures and organizations that are people-centric. Where are the places we could shift? Where are the places that we could leverage? And getting into story with CEOs who have had so many years of experiences, not only just leading organizations here in the US, but also globally, was the best way to do it. And I'm so excited to have this partnership with Dave Falter, who you're about to hear from. He's a returning guest here at the Warriors at Work show. He's a 6-time CEO. He, as he calls himself, is a growth executive. So he sees everything through the lens of possibility and expansion. So we start the series with me talking to Dave about what he sees as followership. What does it look like? What does it look like when someone's not creating an environment of followership? And what's at stake? We talk about the many experiences that he has had, but we also talk about the last year and a half as a very rich learning opportunity from a business and leadership perspective. I am so happy to be able to be in service to all of you and bring these extraordinary leaders to your feet. And I hope that it enlightens, inspires, and reminds you what extraordinary people you are in the world. Welcome to the Warriors at Work show. This is Jeanie Coomber, your guide and host, and this is your weekly dose of inspiration with an edge. And I'm thrilled to have with me, again, a returning guest, Dave Falter. Dave, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me back. Thank you.
So I'm excited to get into this conversation. As you know, we're dedicating the entire month of September to the conversation around followership. So this is a co-created conversation. I was thrilled that Dave was willing to come back in and talk about this through the lens of his own experience. So where I would love to begin is you are a 6-time CEO. So you've seen lots of organizations, you've seen lots of leaders in action. I would love for you to describe the best that you have seen, and then let's describe the worst. And we'll use that as a framing on how we're going to be talking about followership.
Well, okay. That's great. I think the best have consistently exhibited maybe 4 different qualities. I mean, they all exhibit humility. They all exhibit generousness in terms of their own experience, their willingness to share, their ability or desire to coach, whether formally or informally, to help people sort of sort through challenging situations and to arguably be the best executives that they can be. Their transparency and authenticity, and their commitment to the cause, and in that they don't have to be firebrands or sort of wild-eyed, but it's very evident in how they speak about the vast number of things that they need to manage as executive leaders. They always sort of consistently have this theme around the cause in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, and they always, like any good speaker, they always seem to know how to come back to the base, as it were. So those sort of 4 or 5 things I think are very consistent in the best leaders that I've witnessed. And I think I could sort of pick 2 words, interestingly enough, for the worst. Narcissists and thieves would be my.
Thieves, you said?
Thieves, yes, like literally like thieves. I think are the worst. And so there are, narcissists are clearly all about themselves.
Yeah.
And almost every conversation is somehow is a reflection of them or about them. They are not particularly interested in not only what you have to say, but what you think, what your issues are, what have you. They're mostly interested in self-preservation related types of thinking. And, in thieves, I actually mean people who actually steal. I really do actually mean that. But I also mean people who are thieves of others' energy, thieves of their goodness, whatever it is that they're bringing to the table that is positive, that is additive. They're good at sort of siphoning that off for themselves and making it sort of their own unique asset, as opposed to something where they get behind it and amplify it. So they're not typically very good they're not very good leaders because they don't know how to build teams. They don't know how to maintain teams, unless those teams are, and I would argue they're probably not truly teams, are constructs where they sit in the center and are always in the center, for that matter. So I think those are sort of the worst leaders that I've seen. The thievery kind of notwithstanding, just for a minute, sometimes the narcissism also can be a behavior that's projected because of fear. So what's the thing I know best? I know myself the best. What's the thing that I know I need to protect? I need to protect myself. What's the thing I don't want anybody else to find out? That I really don't know what I'm talking about, or I don't know the answer to this particular question, or that I am fearful that we're going to make a mistake and it's going to reflect poorly on me. So those are the worst, and I've seen them. Unfortunately, I've come in as a one of the reasons why I'm a multiple time chief executive is that I've worked in the private equity industry quite a bit. You come in to run other people's businesses effectively, and I've come into businesses where the predecessor executives have been narcissists and thieves, and the business is in real disrepair because of it.
Wow. And when you think about your own, because I know you're very much a learner's mindset, but you're also very much a growth executive. It's one of the things that you talk about when you describe yourself. Which of those scenarios do you find that you learn the most in?
You mean if you're working with or
Yeah. So is
being
it
led by the narcissist versus the
yes.
look, I think and I would say this to my kids. I think you really can learn pretty much equally from both. You might have different emotional reactions. There might be a different emotional context or sort of dimension to it, but they're both really important learning lessons because you're trying to understand human nature. You're trying to understand why are those people that way. I think you want, in the case of their narcissists and thieves, why are they that way? What is the actual nature of the disruption that they're causing? What is the actual nature of the limitation that they're creating on the growth opportunities for the business, for the individuals, and for the business itself? And then obviously there are tremendous opportunities to learn when you're being led by executives who are humble and transparent and authentic and all these other things I just said. I think they're kind of equal in a way. And you know what? Regrettably, you're going to run across both. So one of the things I even do say to my children, who are all young adult men, is pay attention. Don't dismiss it. Don't ignore it. If you're being managed by somebody who's doing a very bad job of managing and leading, and try to understand it. Make sure that it's not behaviors that you will model, but also try to understand why they're there. Try to understand why they take this point of view, why they behave this way. Because frankly, you're still going to be, they could be very senior to you. They may be several levels above you. They're still going to have their jobs for some period of time, and you need to still survive and thrive. So understand the context. You may one of the dimensions of understanding it might be, I just can't stay here very long. I need to start figuring out how to get out of here. but also, um, by developing a certain understanding maybe of why those executives are that way, maybe you can make contributions that are helpful in kind of steering the business a little bit, even as a junior person. Yeah.
It's you just sharing that context just immediately struck me because the business that I'm in the listening business, so I'm listening to executives all day long, and I hear two camps. I hear lion dressed in lamb's clothing, where
Hmm.
it's not immediately evident as to who is actually leading, and then once you realize it, then you're like, aha, I'm in the narcissist, potentially thievery. Sometimes it's energetic vampires is what I call them.
Oh, that's pretty good. Like,
Yeah, energetic vampires. And then what you're doing is you have to know the environment in which you're operating. And then once you know, then you can create more choice. What does this mean to me? How is this person leading, growing the business? What is it I need to do? How do I have to position myself, my team? It's when we don't know, when we're asleep at the switch or we're sleepwalking, hoping for the best, even though our instincts are telling us this is not a leader that we want to follow, or is a leader that's creating any kind of followership throughout the organization. It's when we don't know that I think it's more dangerous. So I love that you're like naming it and calling it out. And it isn't necessarily, hey, get out of there. It's worth take it for what it's worth and start to plan and position yourself around whatever is in front of you.
well, I think, yeah, Jeanie, that's great. I think there's a couple of reasons why you want to do this as well. I mean, obviously, you don't want to sort of cut and run at the first sign of trouble, for starters.
Right.
And, it's very difficult to know what leaders are going to be like until you kind of get into the org. Let's say you're a new hire, whether you're a senior level new hire or you're a junior, workforce entrant. You don't know what things are going to be like until you kind of get a little bit of time there. So, to your point, you don't even have to be sleepwalking, by the way. It's a very common sort of reaction to just hope it goes away, hope it changes, etc. So, I think the thing that I would argue, particularly to maybe younger executives who might be listening to this, is it's probably not going to go away on its own. It is going to go away. There will be a change. Those behaviors are not sustainable. They're not sustainable. Now, and without sort of sounding really dramatic, they're not sustainable in a way where if they persist sort of on an indefinite period of time, the business is probably going to go out of business. It's going to go into bankruptcy. It's going to have something. The thievery problem is going to show up. A board member or not some number of board members, a very important stakeholder, supplier, customer, is eventually going to out these executives. And that's when the reckoning will happen. It's just not, the unfortunate part is that it just sucks so much energy and so much potential out of the business to have executives that lead that way or are that way. Then it's going to create damage, but it doesn't last forever. It just can't, actually.
Yeah. So then let's talk about followership, because that's what we're here to
Right.
bring awareness to. And part of this whole month is to have conversations with different CEOs in different intervals of their career to talk about this journey. So tell me what you characterize followership to be.
Fair question. And I think a lot of people are like, what is followership? Well, what is that all about? What's that word supposed to be? Like, do I have to be a good follower? And followership is really just the other side of the coin of leadership, in the sense that, what is the most significant measure of effective leadership? It is being followed. Simple. That's all it is. That's all it is. So now you could argue that there are sort of cases in history where, a combination of socio-political events and a megalomaniac, et cetera, creates followership that's incredibly unhealthy. Again, not self-sustaining usually. It ends up in war and all kinds of other issues. But for the most part, the best way to measure effective leadership is to look at the followership base. Is the followership engaged? Are the things that the executive leader says resonating with the employee base? And so this is what I really mean by followership. Is it's kind of a form of consumerism in the leadership mindset, that you understand your stakeholders and that you speak and act and deliver your own value in a way that is consistent with what they need, what they expect. And so I think that's why I use this term followership. So there are different ways of thinking about followership, from a methodology or from a philosophical perspective. Servant leadership, which we've talked about the first time that you and I met, is a methodology or a way of describing what followership looks like and the relationship between the follower and the leader, frankly. But at the end of the day, what I say about what is good followership is simply the ability for a leader to create those who actually want to follow. And that by proxy goes back to a story I think I told you when I first met you as well, which is I came into the realization after sort of being employee one and kind of getting to maybe about employee 25 or 30 when I started my first company, that I had a different relationship as a leader with the employee base. I had to stop thinking about what it was to lead, which up to that certain epiphany was about me. How was I presenting myself, who I was? Did I have the sort of force of will to lead this business and to help it grow from nothing into something? And it became literally overnight in an epiphany. My mindset changed because I was like, I have to figure out how to get these people to come back to work the next day. Now, before, early on, they were all dependent on me because they were dumb enough to say yes when I first tried to hire them, right? So we went from employee 1 to employee 2 to employee 10 to employee 20, 25. And they're really looking at you every day kind of going, there are certain aspects about you that they admire, certain aspects that they kind of trust. They're not exactly sure why. Maybe you have some charisma. Maybe you have a lot of particular expertise in a field or a market. But then the business kind of gets to a critical mass where it's like, hey, we're actually all in this kind of together. Falter is like still a smart guy that I admire, and I think he's got his act together. But this is now about us 50. And by the way, these are somewhat arbitrary numbers, obviously, but this isn't anymore about our relationship with Dave. This is about our relationship with each other, about our belief in the cause, about our belief that this is a place where we can come and do our best work, and that it's an environment in which we can be successful. And so that, for me, like, I needed to start thinking about the followers, less about me being the leader and more about what I was doing to make them want to follow.
Yeah.
The genesis of this.
The other part of this followership conversation is not only the conditions that you're creating, which is what you're talking about, it's also paying attention to who I'm following. Who are they following? Who are they emulating? Who are they respecting? Who are they seeking and admiring? I always think that's also a very telling element to the environment that's being created. Who are they looking to emulate? Who are they seeking to understand more about? I think it directly feeds back to those conditions that are being created as a leader in an organization. And I think a lot of things that we're talking about here is I feel like a lot of leaders almost take some of this stuff for granted, that, oh, I'm in a leadership position, therefore I now am responsible for an organization of 150, 200 people, whatever. People must follow me. And I think what you're highlighting here is this is a very conscious, deliberate, thoughtful way of leading, is constantly having awareness around, what am I doing? How am I getting people, as you say, coming back to work tomorrow and want to be a part of a shared purpose and want to be a part of something that's bigger than each individual contribution? I'm just reflecting back some of the things that I just heard you say that I think is really important to underline, highlight.
Well, first of all, right on. And I want to unpack a couple of things that you said. One of them is this idea about peer groups, or about who are they modeling, or who inside the organization, who are they following? If you're the chief executive of 500 or 1,000 or 2,000, or it could be even 50, but usually if you're the chief executive of a business with 50 people in it, you probably know everybody somewhat, and well enough. But when you get into sort of the next order of magnitude, say 500 to 5,000, there's just too much span of control for you to really know all the different people in the organization. And I think it's really critical for a good CEO to have a great human capital partner who he or she may have some kind of apparatus, ways of listenings and tools to figure out, like, who are the natural leaders in the organization, because they have strong followership bases. This is exactly the right point, because those are people that you want to cultivate, but they're also really important communication touchdowns or relayers. Like, you want to make sure that they really are buying into your message and that they're relaying it properly and timely. And that's a critical dimension about how you kind of create. It sounds intense, but that's how you kind of create command and control and coordination and alignment, is that you make sure you have identified these successful leaders who have great followerships in various levels of the organization, and that they're properly activated to help you manage your message throughout the organization. Because actually, that is one of your critical roles as the CEO, is that, you're trying to take the complex, make it simple, message it consistently, message it often. That's what you're really doing as a CEO. I mean, as much as you're messing around with balance sheets and other stuff,
Right.
That's one of your core jobs. So the other thing that you said, which is interesting about sort of, I have the job, so everybody must follow me, is that a lot of modern leadership philosophy and methodology is military based. The big difference between the military and business is that you can go to jail if you don't follow.
Very good point.
Yeah, it's called the brig, and you don't go to the brig. You don't go to the brig in business, but you do go to the brig in the Navy. So there, a lot of their leadership constructs, and this is, by the way, in no means, no way, or anyhow, to say that leadership education at the academies is not absolutely sterling, because it is. But they do understand that they have this sort of fundamental underpinning, which is, you're either here because we have conscription, or you're here because you volunteered to be. But once you volunteered and actually took your position as a private or a corporal or a captain, I own you. Like, this is how it works. So, and there's tremendous respect for rank because of that sort of order and understanding of how things work. Business is not the same. People vote with their feet every day. So you have to figure out what's it really take to retain them? What's it really take to excite them? How do you get them to give you their best? It's a little different. It's a little different challenge.
You just struck an interesting question. So we're definitely aligned on what we think followership is and how you create it. Why do you think that companies? I don't hear companies using the term a lot. And I also don't see companies spending time and dollars actually skill building around it. Because I'm also thinking in my own career journey, almost, a little over, almost 30 years ago now, when I first started, nobody even talked to me about how do you lead? How do you manage? I mean, you use some sort of traditional management courses, but no one was really talking about the attributes that you started with when we began this conversation. You talked about very specific attributes. Why do you think companies are not laser focused on this earlier in your career? Here's what it is. We're going to teach you these skills, attributes, ways of being. And then if you're not embodying them, that's the other side of the equation. I'm not seeing a lot of companies pulling people out to say, you know what? This is not your jam. You're going to be somewhere else. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, let's just tease apart this idea of the leader who is being trained from a functional leader. So the general management leader, which I think is what we tend to talk about when we talk about, particularly with I think with the Warriors at Work Nation, I think we tend to talk about executive leadership with broad spans of control. And I know that's not exclusive. I know we have plenty of CMOs and CFOs, right, and what have you in your viewership. But I think that most leadership training historically, first of all, it continues today. There's a tremendous paucity of leadership training. It's just not, for whatever reason, it's just not a focus for corporations. And many corporations, by the way, still struggle with just having learning and development programs, period, end of story. Whether it's a call center agent or it's a SVP going to EVP, and maybe he or she is on track to become the CEO someday, that's the first time they're probably seeing leadership training of any real substance. And they've been in the company, let's say, 20 years already. So I don't understand exactly why this is such an underinvested area. I have, and I'm a little unique in this way, I've always invested a lot of time and energy in leadership training. But that's also been management training and leadership training. As I think we've talked about that in our previous interview, which is they're similar but different practices, right? So where there's been leadership training has typically been in functional roles like sales management, sales leaders, what have you, is a good example. And in that particular case, again, regrettably, ask any really good sales leader or any really good salesperson for that matter, and they're going to tell you that one of the most common but most dangerous things in the world is to promote a salesperson into a management job because they're really good at selling. They're not the same job at all. So the first instinct is, well, if everybody just does it the way I do it, we're all going to be successful. And the truth is that salesperson may be successful for a whole array of reasons. There may be some consistent 2 or 3 things that you can kind of consistently identify across the different salespeople. Those behaviors exhibit, sort of end up being part and contributing to success. But selling and managing are entirely different jobs. And yet you often take your best salespeople, take them off the street, put them into management jobs. They're a mess in the management job. You lost your selling capacity, and they're trying to teach everybody how to do it the way they do it. And maybe the way they do it is almost like an amalgam, like it's not even repeatable. They're just natural eagles, as it's a term that's often used. They're eagles, they're just natural salespeople. They couldn't teach another person how to sell if they wanted to, because they don't even know. They don't even know why they're so good. But anyway, that's a functional role. You see it. You see it also in finance. A lot of really smart people who are sort of either mathematically gifted or really understand the language of accounting, or both. They kind of come up to the ranks because they are very technical and they're good at their jobs and they can handle more and more complexity. But whether or not they can actually manage other finance executives, that's never really discussed. Never really taught how to do it. So people who make CFO often are people who kind of by accident have demonstrated they can be good managers. Probably they've also demonstrated to the non-finance executives that they understand commerce, they understand how the rest of the business runs, not just all about speeds and feeds and numbers. But I've seen challenges over and over again in finance organizations that are just grotesquely underled, because no one ever showed these very, very smart, but technically enabled people how to manage and lead. So anyway, it's a long way of saying, Jeanie, it's a problem. It's still a problem. I think businesses need to spend a lot more time on this topic.
I'm going to do a quick timeout. I have to shut off my email. Keeps dinging. Hold on one second.
Oh, I can't hear it on my
All right. Quit mail. Got it. Okay, that's better. It keeps going ding, ding. It's driving me nuts.
Stop it.
Stop it. All right. So let's talk about your leadership journey. Tell me about a time where you didn't have followership. A, how'd you know? And 2, what'd you do about it?
Well, there's at least twice. Pardon me, at least twice. And when you go into the room, by the way, for those of you who are listening, if you get a new job and you're like the president or CEO, whatever you come in, don't just blunder into the business. Call in the leadership team privately, talk to them privately for a while, because you're going to really get a good read right away whether or not they want you there. It doesn't take long to watch the faces. You can see the fear, you can see the anger, you can see the disengagement. People are people. They're going to do their best to hide it, but they can't. They just can't. So I've been in 2 different situations where, in one case, I think the person who I replaced, and in both cases I was replacing somebody. The person I replaced was the founder of the business, and I'm going to keep it gender neutral so I don't give it away. But that executive had done a nice job building the business, had sold it to a large corporation, and was not succeeding in the role of leading this business in the context of the larger framework that had bought the business. And so that executive needed to be replaced. And many of the people at the table were people that had been handpicked by this executive. And so they didn't want to see that executive go. They also were probably a little, in fact, I know they were a little afraid that maybe they were on borrowed time because maybe they weren't as good at their job as they thought they were, or, whatever their own sort of doubts or misgivings were. And that, this new guy is going to come in and kind of blow this whole place up, which I'm not going to lie is part of your job ultimately. So they're smart in knowing that change is going to happen, but how it's going to happen, why it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, that's not necessarily decided upon yet at all. So, I had this first case, I literally told everybody that they just needed to extend trust to me, that they probably weren't sure they could, that I had the organization's best interest in mind, that in no way, shape, or form was I there to kind of prepare to shut down this division or to gut it or to rip it in half and, any other sort of imaginary horrible, but I was there to actually release the potential of the organization that existed and help the business begin to deliver on its marketplace promises that it had made like 2 years ago. So one of the reasons why I was brought in was that this other executive was a very good salesperson in many ways, and had told a lot of big clients, I'm talking about Fortune 50 clients, that certain types of functionality were going to be happening like any day. And literally like 2 years later, people were pretty unhappy because it still hadn't delivered. So, my whole thing is like, those were good promises. They just were not promises that should have been made. And they shouldn't have been made with the kinds of timelines that were promised. And from an ambition and aspiration perspective, they're absolutely appropriate, but they should not have been communicated the way they were and when they were. I'm here to help unleash that, and I'm going to need your guys' help. So, I kind of put myself in a vulnerable position. I'm not saying that was artificial. I was very vulnerable. I knew I couldn't be successful if I couldn't figure out which one of these people were keepers and how to get them engaged and make sure they were going to kind of, help me be successful, frankly. At the end of the day, their success is going to be my success. In the second case, and then, by the way, it took some time, but it didn't take that long. I have to say, what I found out was that there was actually a huge amount of fatigue in the organization, particularly at the leadership level, because they had been getting kicked in the teeth about these promises that had been made by the chief executive. Also, it was really stressing people out because they knew that they were way behind. And also that the competition was beginning to catch. So this is a business that had been way out ahead in many ways. And one of the reasons why the parent company bought it. But they saw the competition was catching up because they just simply weren't delivering on some of these very ambitious, concepts about what the technology could do. In the second case, that was actually a narcissist and thieves problem. And so I came in and found out that previous executives had just gutted the place, had gutted it from an emotional perspective, had gutted it from a moral perspective, had gutted it from a financial perspective. Very, very disappointing. Wow. And the owners did not entirely understand that. And that was kind of a hard conversation to have with them because I had to be very factual. Obviously, I needed to make sure I had my own ducks in a row about what I was observing. And I actually had been given a lot of sort of tidbits or feedback about, from various other executives that volunteered to me, like, everything's not quite right here. You need to really look at blah, 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 So people were kind of keeping me off on the inside anyway. But one of the other challenges there was that it was a very global business and it had a lot of different executives from different parts of the world. And one of the things that they were not thrilled about was that they had an American running the business. And, we like to think of ourselves as being the best business people in the world. We like to think of ourselves as being the most gracious and coolest people in the world. And we're not. And, and also that you forget as an American that your style does not fly everywhere. There are other cultures where there are ways that you even just start sentences. There are ways that you start emails and finish emails. They're not the same as what we do here in America. And it wasn't until I so we were probably 2 months in. And I actually think people were starting to figure out that I was sort of the real deal, at least that my heart was in the right place, and I had a mind that was solid enough for me. I could figure out how to run this business and help it get back on track. But there were a lot of other, like I said, these cultural dimensions where there was just a lot of mistrust. And so, frankly, I called this team back together after about 2 months, and I said, I need you guys to help me understand what I need to do to be successful here. I want you guys to tell me what I need to do to be successful here. And you know what? It was like a 3-hour, it wasn't a bitch session, but it was like a 3-hour meeting after that. And they were telling me about, like, you can't yell in meetings. You can't do that. Like, I mean, I'm not saying I'm a yeller because I'm not, but I was yelling a couple times because there was stuff that just wasn't happening. Like, we all agreed it was going to happen. And then, like, 6 weeks later, it hadn't happened. I'm like, what is going on? Like, you just can't, you're going to lose everybody if you yell. So you got to figure out a way to keep your cool. We understand you're frustrated. We understand why you're frustrated. You got to keep your cool. By the way, when you start an email, do it this way. And make sure you do this when you finish an email. You'll get people's attention. They're going to figure out that you get it, that you're one of us, because this is a very European company. And that was a gift. But in that case, I think the followership thing happened because I was like, what will it take for you guys to be good followers? Like, literally, just tell me, and then I'll figure it out from there. And, I had the good luck that they were very generous and I think for the most part, very honest with giving me that feedback.
That's an incredible story because there's two things that you just gave as great examples. One is your transparency, your level of transparency, and calling out, here's what I am, here's who I am, this is where I'm struggling. And then secondly, I need your help. And
Mhm.
just you telling the story about working for a European company, I lived in London for 2 years. My first week or so, I was 24 years old. I learned real fast. My American style of getting things done was not going to work. I was
First, you're not welcome, right?
not welcome. I had to say please. I had to say thank you. I even had to lower my volume. And I did a lot of work on
Yep.
the continent too. And that was a huge, huge adjustment. But I had a very kind soul that came over to me and said, there's a couple of things that you're doing that you probably don't have awareness to. But I think this is going to help you get a lot more done, because I'd be like, no one's calling me back. No one's returning my email. I'm not getting anything done. And I was getting all this pressure from US based bosses going, why aren't you getting anything done? And I'm like, I don't know. But I was so appreciative to her, because then I was able to say to her, did that land right? I'm not really sure. Did that come across the right way? But I love your examples, because that to me really encapsulates this whole concept of naming it for what it is, and also demonstrating to the organization, this is the type of leader I am. I need your followership. I want your followership, and this is what I'm looking to create. So you really got everybody involved. I would love for you to just zoom out for a second. Let's look at the current business climate, particularly over the last year and a half.
Mhm.
When you think about organizations that are really, and you don't have to name the companies, you could even just name the industries that you're assessing as, yep, good examples of followership, poor examples of followership. Like, what immediately comes to mind?
Well, I mean, they're both United States. They're both global companies, but both U.S. domiciled companies. And I think I'll say them by name, because I really respect and admire the two chief executives. And I mentioned Satya Nadella, I think, from Microsoft in our previous conversation. And I think one of the things that is evident to me, because that's a very, very big company, a global franchise. In fact, lots of sub franchises, as it were, that a lot of big businesses to kind of protect and nurture. And he, I think, has been getting it right for a while, because he's really an active listener.
Mm,
And that's not to imply that either Bill or Steve weren't smart, or didn't, weren't good executives, but they weren't listeners like Satya is. And I think that's really helped them as a business. I think it's helped them figure out how to be much more competitive in a rapidly shifting technology landscape. Um, because his way of being an active listener, his way of sort of saying, "I don't know, I need your help," kind of going back to your other remark, I think has engendered a lot of loyalty. I think it's almost engendered a lot of curiosity in the
mm,
employee. It's like, who is this guy? Like, what's this all about? Like, this is very different at Microsoft than it was, say, 10 years ago. And I think that's because they're not Google and they're not Facebook. They're not like those companies in many, many, many ways. And yet they are growing and they are thriving. And I think a lot of the employees at Microsoft are pretty happy. Um, Whereas I don't think they were that happy a decade ago. I think they were kind of thinking, like, where's this all going? So that has a lot to do, I think, with his style. The other company that I think is interesting, and both companies, again, as I said before, I think have myriad challenges because they're big, growing, global businesses, is Salesforce, which is run by an executive named Mark Benioff, that some people may have heard of. He's somewhat famous as well now, but maybe not as famous as Nadella. And he is um, he's a very grassroots, ground up kind of guy. I mean, he was one of the guys that started the company, right? So he's still got a lot of that sort of startup mentality. I think about like where goodness comes from. Goodness comes from every blade of grass somehow contributing together to kind of create the lawn, and the lawn creates the yard, and he. I think one of the things that he has been super consistent about is he is all about the customer and all about keeping the customer in the center of the conversation. So when you think about the pandemic, or you think about other things that kind of shove businesses around, but with things that bump into us and take us off of our game, or take us out of our game for that matter, I would argue that focus on the customer is sort of that incredible sort of mass that everything can be lashed to. And Mark is super consistent about that. I mean, it comes up in all the way he talks, the way his executives talk to him, the way his executives talk to their people, et cetera, super consistent there. And then on top of that, I think he's very socially minded, and he's not afraid to be socially minded. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say whether or not I think this is 100% appropriate for all chief executives to be so socially engaged, but Mark is, and he's not fearful about doing it, and he is super consistent about doing it. So it's not like he kind of like takes a shot across the bow at a particular president. He's always going to be coming out in the marketplace with how he feels about the world and how he feels the business should be participating in the world. So I think both of those are interesting. If there was a connectivity there, I think it'd be this transparency and authenticity.
And having a position and not being afraid to give the position, I think, is really interesting too. Not for the sake of being politically correct or socially attuned, but honestly and from a heartfelt standpoint, putting positions out there, knowing that it may not necessarily be popular, but it's very authentic to their styles.
Right. I mean, you think about it, the shareholder base has to kind of get okay with that too, right? Because this is what, like in case of Mark, this is what he's going to do. So if you're going to own Salesforce stock, he might say something that's going to upset somebody. But that's who you got at the top. And he's got the courage of his convictions, and that's going to be a consistent behavior for him. I think a lot of the people like that about him. I think a lot of his employees really like that about him. So those are just two people that kind of come to mind.
So let's talk about, we have a few more weeks of different CEOs coming onto the Warriors at Work platform to have different conversations. And Dave, you've been a partner around this concept of followership with me since we started talking about it a couple of months ago. What would you like the impact to be?
Well, I think the fact that you're even doing this, though, Jeanie, the fact that you're even doing this is the impact. The impact is if people can walk away, if the nation can walk away, kind of becoming convinced that leading is not about them. I think I feel like we've scored a huge one, because that's going to, I really, if all of you who are listening, I really think you're going to become better managers and leaders literally on day 0+1. If you really can believe and embody that in your behavior and your thinking, people will begin to follow you. If you're struggling with people following you now, trust me, they'll begin to follow you if they really believe that you care about their followership, and that you're willing to ask the questions, demonstrate the humility, demonstrate the vulnerability to find out what it is that will excite them about you leading them. And you'll become a materially better leader, and you're also going to become a lot more relaxed leader, because you're actually, you kind of know. You don't have to like fake it till you make it. You're not like coming into work every day going, I'm the vice president of blah, blah, blah. I hope everybody remembers that today. So I don't care what your title is. They care that you're there, that they trust you, and that they respect you, and that they admire you. And they probably admire you because of your humility, because of your transparency, because of your consistency, because of your authenticity. And that's what's going to make great followership. So I'm hopeful, I think, Jeanie, that inside from the nation, that the nation takes the message out, again, in practice, to the people that maybe are not part of Warriors at Work, and that people get to witness this in action.
That is such a great way to end our conversation. You've given the advice. You've told them, here's where you're going to go with the information and the interviews that are going to be shared in the next couple of weeks. And I can't wait to circle back to see how all of this resonates with all of you. And then Dave and I are going to come on back after the series has concluded, and we're going to provide to you, we'll call it an executive summary of what we've learned, what we heard in those conversations, kind of like the cliff notes of the whole series. But all of it is in an effort to help all of you in the Warriors at Work community continue to elevate up your game, expand your capacity as leaders and people who are bringing goodness to the world. So stay tuned for more. Dave, thank you as always for being in the conversation with me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Warriors at Work show. If you are interested in learning more about what we do at the Warriors at Work show and platform, be sure to go over to my website, Jeanie Coomber, and subscribe to my monthly Warrior Playbook newsletter. I share everything that I'm up to month by month, as well as some lessons and insights that I've learned. I'm also interested in hearing any feedback you have about this conversation or future topics. So reach out to me directly on jc@jeanniecoomber.com or on LinkedIn. Be sure to tell your friends and your colleagues about this Warriors at Work conversation. Subscribe, review, and rate us. It's the best way to get this message out into the world. Be well.